Here is. I knew you were around. Dear friends, let me start by thanking all of you for taking the time in a very busy and important week here in New York for joining us in this meeting. We have thought that this was the right time to reconvene in this moment, to see together how we can help the Syrian people to get out of one of the darkest pages of history. The war in Syria is not over yet. The people of Syria are still suffering, and every day the social and economic fabric of Syria suffers new damage. And as the war in Syria continues, the recovery will be much, much slower and reconciliation more difficult and more painful. Millions of refugees are eager to go back to their country, to their communities, and to their normal lives. Also for them, and also for the incredible solidarity and resilience shown by their host communities in neighboring countries, Syria has to find its way out of war, rise from its ashes, and start anew. At the Brussels conference last April, we collectively pledged almost $10 billion in 2 years in an incredible demonstration of unity and solidarity from the international community. It's money for Syrians, men, women, children, inside the country and in the region. We now need to move from pledging to delivering. And we, the European Union, we are delivering. Commissioner Stylianides will tell you more about that. We need to closely monitor this delivering during these coming weeks and months, because conferences, pledging conferences, need then to translate these commitments into real actions on the ground. But to ensure that this work is consistently carried out, we are going to host, as the European Union, a second Brussels conference next week. Sorry, next spring. Next week, I guess you will recover from something else. In this way, we will launch a Brussels process that will put our convening power at the service of the Syrian people, all of them, those that are still inside the country and those that are in the region. And we will offer to all of us, all the international community, the opportunity to come together, unite, as we've done last April in Brussels, and affirm and confirm both our financial commitment and our political will. Because our commitment is not just about money, even if money is important. Since our last meeting in Brussels, the situation on the ground has improved. Daesh is being driven out from its strongholds thanks to the sacrifice of many. The Astana process has helped reducing violence and define the escalation zones. For many Syrians, this makes the difference between life and death. But all this progress can only become permanent and sustainable if it is shored up by a political solution to the conflict. And this is why this conference this year is not only about humanitarian support, but it's also about our support to the political process in Geneva. There can be no long-lasting peace, nor a long-lasting defeat of terrorism in Syria without an inclusive agreement negotiated in Geneva under UN auspices and under the wise leadership of my friend Staffan de Mistura. Recent history, including in the region, tell us that local reconciliation agreements are key elements of any solution, of any conflict, but do not hold and cannot hold in the lack of a broad political agreement. In the case of Syria, an agreement that guarantees that the country remains one, united, and is the place where all Syrians feel at home, safe and respected in their differences. A partition of Syria would lead to more unrest. It is not what the Syrians want for the country. It is not, definitely not, what the region needs. With the progress made in Astana and on the ground, it is now time for the parties in Geneva to start serious work. All of us in this room, as different and diverse as we are, we can play a very important role in accompanying them in this difficult mediation under Staffan's wise leadership. In the meantime, our humanitarian support will continue and possibly expand. We are, as European Union, willing and ready to bring our help also in the de-escalation zones and in the liberated areas, making sure that the aid will actually reach the people in need. The Syrians living in these areas don't only need food and medicines, they do, but they also want to go back to their lives. For this reason, we in the European Union are now looking into means of support that go beyond the classical humanitarian aid. We have great expertise in demining. We could work on early recovery, providing basic services and health facilities, helping life start again where it can start again. Let us be clear, we will only go from this early recovery to reconstruction once a credible and inclusive political agreement has been reached in Geneva. We will be prepared when the day of peace finally comes, because we believe it can come. We could use the perspective of reconstruction also as a powerful tool to facilitate reconciliation and to encourage a political agreement. It's a dividend of peace. As Europeans, we know the power of peace can make different parties make courageous steps. This is why our work is so important today and next spring in Brussels. We can together, under the UN leadership, close together one of the darkest chapters in our modern history. I thank you very much once again, and I would now pass the floor to Staffan de Mistura.
Thank you very much, Federica, and thank you, European Union, for this very timely initiative. Many of the points I would have said have been covered by you. That shows how much we are in sync in trying to address this crisis. So let's look very quickly to what are the positive facts. You heard some of them, and they are there. What would have been not imaginable 1 year ago, all of us, think about it. The two strongholds of Daesh presence are on the edge of being finally liberated. One is Deir ez-Zor, and the other one, very soon, we hope, we believe, is Raqqa. Second, a series of de-escalation agreements, 3 in Astana, and I want to give credit and gratitude to the Astana authorities for having facilitated and supported those meetings, which have been very fruitful, and 1 in Amman, which has also produced some important reduction of violence in one part of Syria. Then we have Idlib, as you know, which has been the result of the last Astana meeting, which is currently being finalized and discussed on the ground. That's where those agreements are tested. But we are now in a clear reduction of violence. This means, as you rightly said, the most important thing. Many people's lives have been saved, and the liberation of territories under the cruel rule of Daesh has been almost completed. So the Astana process, as we call it, and the Amman negotiations have produced a substantial reduction of violence. The guarantors should be praised for such outcome. The question is, here comes the first question, are these de-escalation areas going to be limited, as they claim, and we hope, for 6 months? Or do they risk to become a de facto soft partition of Syria in 4 or 5 areas of influence? Obviously, the answer is no. But we need to ask that question and be ready for answering it de facto. Second, the next question is, have we learned from the tragic experience of Mosul, i.e., which means that the Daesh, to be really defeated, is not enough to crush it on the ground, which hopefully is taking place while we are talking, but there is a need for a comprehensive, credible, inclusive political solution. Conclusion. The answer is, for us, now that the Astana process has almost completely and successfully fulfilled its task of military de-escalation, we now urgently need political de-escalation. This means returning to the Geneva UN-led political meetings. There was a period, probably you will remember, for quite a few months before the Aleppo tragedy, that there was a suspension de facto of the Geneva talks. It was not because we didn't want it, on the contrary, but because there was a collapse of the ceasefire agreed between, at that time, the US administration and the Russian Federation, and then the terrible events in Aleppo. And only after we were able to see the Astana taking place and Geneva being ready. So it's time for Geneva, this time to ensure the sustainability of the de-escalation areas along the lines of 2254. If we miss this window of opportunity, well, we will be regretting it once again. And I'm sure we are all realizing this is the time for actually going back to the political discussion that leads to many other developments for the Syrian people. The rest is for my colleagues on the humanitarian side to comment on. Thank you.
Yes. Dear Federica, dear Stefan, dear Filippo, dear Mark, Excellencies, dear friends. My task is easier now. Indeed, it's easier to take the floor and talk about Syria after Federica and Stefan, who have both brilliantly covered all key aspects already. So give me a chance to be brief. After more than 6 years of fighting, the humanitarian situation in Syria remains appalling, and the lack of access continues to represent an enormous challenge. In hard-to-reach areas, we've reached only 13% of the 4 million people in need. Our joint effort must be towards reaching all of them by using all aid modalities, including cross-border. The renewal of Security Council resolution is vital in this regard. The parties to the conflict and primarily the government of Syria still hold the responsibility to grant unhindered access. In the same vein, all parties must ensure the protection of civilians. Deliberate attacks on public places, schools, and aid workers must cease completely. As much as life-saving activities will remain our utmost priority in Syria, they will not be enough to cover all the needs. In all this, we want to reaffirm our support to neighboring host countries, especially Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan, home to more than 5 million Syrian refugees. Much still needs to be done to provide a perspective to both refugees and host communities. In the medium to long run, this certainly means a return to Syria. But let me be clear, conditions inside Syria are not ripe yet for the safe return. One final point. During the Brussels conference earlier this year, we secured an unprecedented $6 billion for 2017 alone. It's our obligation to turn these pledges into reality. Dear friends, in our first panel discussion today, Mark Locklock, the Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Head of OCHA, will introduce the inside Syrian dimension. And second, Filippo Grandi, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, will then introduce the regional dimension. Let me now hand over to Mark to open the first panel discussion. Mark, the floor is yours.
Christos, thank you very much indeed. When we met in Brussels in April, we heard strong statements of humanitarian commitment. As both Federica and Christos has said, $6 billion pledged by over 40 governments for this year, with a further nearly $4 billion for 2018. There was also a clear agreement that the civilians whose lives have been destroyed by years of conflict must remain at the forefront of the international community's agenda. And that was expressed by voicing unconditional support to meet humanitarian needs inside Syria and the region, and by highlighting the importance of support for early recovery and resilience building for displaced Syrians and their hosts. Life-saving humanitarian needs remain, as Christos has said, enormous, and the delivery of assistance through the most direct routes remains critical. De-escalation has resulted in calm in some parts of the country, but an increase in anti-ISIL operations in the east has caused fresh suffering and displacement. From Raqqa to Idlib to Deir ez-Zor, civilians continue to face serious protection concerns as fighting and access constraints continue. This year alone, another 1 million people have been internally displaced. all parties to the fighting must be pressured to respect international humanitarian law. The United Nations and its partners are assisting millions of people each month through regular programming, through cross-line convoys and cross-border programming. The importance of this latter approach cannot be underestimated, as it brings thousands of people access to otherwise unavailable life-saving services, including education and health. Saving lives and protecting civilians remains our priority in Syria, but these humanitarian efforts must also, when possible, aim to build resilience by supporting access to livelihoods and access to basic services. To translate the determination expressed in successive conferences in Kuwait, London and Brussels, we need to see all pledges for the UN-coordinated appeals for Syria and the region turned into contributions, including through the Syria Humanitarian Fund, which provides direct support to frontline responders. The humanitarian response plan for inside Syria is only 36% funded. The regional refugee and resilience plan, just 39%. We can and we must do better for the Syrian people. Ultimately, of course, the only sustainable way to address the humanitarian crisis is to end the conflict through a credible political agreement. Thank you.
Now I pass the floor to Filippo Grandi because his flight will be after his intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to join the previous speakers in thanking Federica and the European Union for convening this meeting. My message, complementary to Mark's message, will be fairly simple. Whilst the attention focuses, and rightly so, on the future of the peace process and what's happening inside Syria, please do not forget that we still have more than 5 million refugees, Syrian refugees, in neighboring countries. This continues to be, in spite of more recent emergencies, the largest refugee crisis that my organization is dealing with in the world. And this continues to be a crisis shouldered largely by the neighboring countries, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, Iraq, and Egypt. For some years, the response coordinated by the United Nations to this crisis has been organized around the so-called 3RP plan, a plan led by UNDP and UNHCR, and a plan that focuses essentially on protection and on resilience. This is a program that is very innovative and follows many of the directions that many of you have asked us to embark upon in terms of innovation, in terms of technology, in terms of self-reliance. It is a program that links with broader development programs launched at the London conference in 2016, for example, those supported by the World Bank and others. So it is a very important program that has a value not only for refugees, but for host communities and countries that have paid such a high cost in the last few years. And yet, as Mark said, this is not anymore a well-funded program. We are at the end of September, and the percentage of funding has reached only 39%. I'm a little bit worried, and excuse me if I'm provocative here, and I'm a little bit worried that the commitments made in London and repeated in Brussels, committed that took their inspiration from the big refugee crisis of 2015 and 16 that reached Europe, those commitments, now that Syrian refugees do not reach Europe anymore, those commitments are being forgotten or are being neglected. And also, of course, we have many other crises for which I am asking you for support as well, which compete with the Syrian crisis. But please don't forget that that support continues to be needed. I want to add one more point before I conclude. I'm often asked whether refugees are going to return to Syria soon. We conduct many surveys among refugees and ask them these questions. And overwhelmingly, the response that we get is that they want to return home. This has not changed from the beginning of the crisis. But they also tell us they don't want yet, except for a small minority, to return home now because, as Christos said, the conditions are not ripe. Therefore, what I'm asking you is to stay the course in this effort of supporting host countries and refugees and host communities. Don't waste the investments that have been made for a few years. I was happy to hear from Federica that a new conference will be, or a reminder, a refresher conference will be organized in Brussels next year, pending that comprehensive peace agreement which everybody has invoked. That support is extremely important and in itself is a contribution to that very peace efforts which we're all focusing on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Filippo. Indeed, we need to sustain the humanitarian support, and we hope that at the next Brussels conference we will have pledges delivered, but also linking the political progress in Geneva to the great efforts that have been doing in Astana and a renewed impetus for the political talks. I would now give the floor, starting the debate and the discussion, to Sheikh Sabah Khaled Ahmad Al Sabah, Kuwait.
السيدة الرئيسة، معالي السيدة فيدريكا مورغريني الممثلة العليا للاتحاد الأوروبي للشؤون الخارجية والسياسية والأمنية ونائبة رئيس المفوضية الأوروبية، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، الحضور الكرام، في البداية أود أن أتقدم بخالص الشكر والتقدير لمعالي السيدة فيدريكا مورغريني لعقد هذا الاجتماع الهام بغية الوقوف على مستجدات الأوضاع في سوريا ومتابعة ما نتج عن مؤتمر المانحين الخامس لدعم مستقبل سوريا والأقاليم المجاورة، والذي عقد في العاصمة البلجيكية بروكسل في شهر إبريل الماضي. أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، إن دولة الكويت وإذ تعرب عن بالغ أسفها لاستمرار المأساة الإنسانية في سوريا لعامها السابع، والتي تعد من أكبر المآسي الإنسانية التي شهدها عالمنا المعاصر، فإنها تؤكد مجدداً على ضرورة تكثيف العمل لإيجاد تسوية سلمية وفقاً لما نصت عليه قرارات مجلس الأمن، وعلى الخصوص القرار رقم 2254. كما لا يفوتني في هذه الإشادة في الجهود الكبيرة التي يقوم بها مبعوث الأمين العام الخاص بسوريا السيد ستيفان دي مستورة، متطلعين إلى تضافر تلك المساعي لحل هذه الأزمة في أسرع وقت ممكن. أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، إدراكاً لحجم تلك المأساة الإنسانية وإيماناً بأهمية الوقوف بجانب الشعب السوري الشقيق في الداخل والخارج، فقد قامت دولة الكويت كما تعلمون باستضافة 3 مؤتمرات دولية للمانحين لدعم الشعب السوري الشقيق خلال الأعوام 2013 2014 و2015، علاوة على مشاركاتها في رئاسة مؤتمري المانحين اللذين عقدا في العاصمة البريطانية لندن عام 2016 والعاصمة البلجيكية بروكسل عام 2017، حيث بلغ مجموع ما قدمته دولة الكويت خلال تلك المؤتمرات $1,600,000,000 أمريكي، تم توزيعها عن طريق المنظمات والهيئات والوكالات الإقليمية والدولية، كما خصص منها مبلغ وقدره $250,000,000 أمريكي لدعم القطاعات التعليمية والصحية والبنى التحتية للدول المستضيفة للاجئين السوريين، لا سيما في لبنان والأردن، بإشراف من الصندوق الكويتي للتنمية الاقتصادية العربية، إضافة إلى تخصيص مبلغ وقدره $50,000,000 أمريكي لدعم قطاعات التعليم في لبنان تشرف عليها مؤسسة الكويت للتقدم العلمي. أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، أود من خلال هذا المنبر أن أناشد كافة الدول التي أعلنت عن تعهداتها في المؤتمرات الخمس التي عقدت لدعم الشعب السوري الشقيق بالإيفاء بتلك التعهدات والالتزامات لرفع المعاناة عن الشعب السوري الشقيق في الداخل والخارج، مثمنا عاليا الجهود المقدرة التي يقوم بها الاتحاد الأوروبي ومعالي السيدة موغريني في هذا الإطار، وشكرا لكم.
Shukran. I will now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Norway, Borge Brende.
Thank you, Federica. Thank you for the EU and your personal leadership on this issue, and for also initiating the Brussels conference. The Syria crisis in its 7th year. The human suffering and loss of lives is unbearable. The repeated violence of humanitarian law is unacceptable. And Syria's neighbors continue to shoulder a disproportionate share of the burden. We all have to ask ourselves what more can be done to meet the needs of millions of people still suffering from the crisis. I will make 4 points. 1, we must deliver on our commitments to Syria and the neighboring countries now and in the years to come. It will take years before life will return to normal in Syria. What was destroyed in 6 years might take decades to rebuild. Just imagine if we had accepted the peace plan of Kofi Annan in 2012, Syria would still have been a middle-income country. Last year, a historic $12 billion was pledged in London. This year, more than $6 billion was pledged in Brussels. But no, the UN response plans for Syria and the region has never been more underfunded. This cannot continue. We need to deliver on our pledges, and we need to deliver on our promises to the Syrian people. Norway pledged more than $1 billion at the London conference. We have never pledged this much money before at any UN conference. And we are on track for delivering on every promise. The $1 billion, we have delivered exactly what we promised. Second, education must be a priority for our efforts, both inside Syria and in the neighboring countries. We cannot afford to lose a generation of Syrians. 3, humanitarian access must improve. Lack of access to hard-to-reach areas and besieged areas is a huge obstacle for humanitarian efforts in Syria. It is the parties to the conflict that bear the full responsibility for protecting civilians and ensuring humanitarian access. UN Security Council Resolution 2165 must be renewed. 4th, we should all support the UN's challenging work. Full support also to Stefan. Astana should focus on de-escalation. Only a political solution will lay the foundation for sustainable peace and the full reconstruction of Syria. Finally, I want to thank the neighboring countries for opening up their countries for the refugees. Turkey, Lebanon, and also Jordan and Iraq. I also want to thank the humanitarian and development workers. Their efforts bring not only food and shelter, but also hope to the millions suffering both inside Syria and in the neighboring countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Borg, and thank you for the consistency of the Norwegian commitments. We always count on that, but also for the political support. I now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Qatar, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani.
شكرا سيد الرئيس. معالي الممثلة السامية السيدة موغريني، معالي المفوض ستيليانيديس، أصحاب السعادة والمعالي الزملاء، في البداية أود أن أشكر سعادة الأمين العام غوتيرش ووكيل الأمين العام لوكوك والمبعوث الخاص ديمستورا على حضورهم هذا الاجتماع الهام. ويسرنا أن نلتقي مجددا بشركائنا في هذا المسعى الإنساني الذي يعالج أزمة تعد الأخطر بين الأزمات في العالم، وتستحق اهتماما ومتابعة يتناسبان مع ذلك. وهذا ما تم خلال المؤتمرات الدولية التي عقدت في الكويت ثم لندن، وأخيرا مؤتمر بروكسل الذي شاركنا في عقده. لقد شهدت هذه المؤتمرات الإعلان عن تعهدات كبيرة من قبل مختلف الدول، ولا شك أن الفائدة من التعهدات لا تتحقق إلا بالوفاء بها، كما أن حشد التمويل والمساعدات لا يجدي نفعا ما لم يتم إيصال المساعدات إلى مستحقيها. لذلك يجب على المجتمع الدولي تكثيف الجهود لضمان إيصال المساعدات الإنسانية وعدم عرقلتها من قبل أي طرف كان، وهذا ما أكدت عليه قرارات مجلس الأمن ذات الصلة بالحالة الإنسانية في سوريا. إن دولة قطر لم تدخر جهدا في الوقوف بجانب الأشقاء السوريين وتقديم المساعدات الإنسانية لهم منذ بداية الأزمة، ولقد تعهدت دولة قطر في مؤتمر بروكسل بتقديم 100 مليون دولار أمريكي، وتم حتى الآن الوفاء بالجزء الأكبر من الالتزامات التي تعهدنا بها في مؤتمر بروكسل ومؤتمر لندن الذي سبقه، وليس ذلك إلا جزءا من إجمالي قيمة المساعدات الإغاثية المادية والعينية التي قدمتها دولة قطر، وقد بلغت 1,600,000,000 دولار من خلال الدعم الحكومي والجمعيات الخيرية القطرية لتخفيف معاناة الشعب السوري داخل سوريا وفي دول الجوار، التي نشكرها ونثمن جهودها، وعلى المجتمع الدولي الاستمرار في دعمها لتتمكن من تحمل الأعباء الملقاة عليها. وفي هذا الصدد، وفي ظل تحذيرات الخبراء والوكالات الدولية المعنية كاليونيسيف من ضياع جيل كامل من السوريين، وإدراكا منا لحقيقة أن حرمان الملايين من الأطفال والشباب السوريين من الدراسة هو أمر خطير وأحد أهم الأسباب المؤدية إلى التطرف والعنف والإرهاب، فقد قامت دولة قطر بمبادرات في التعليم والتطوير المهني بالشراكة مع منظمات إنسانية وإقليمية، بما في ذلك المبادرة القطرية لتعليم وتدريب اللاجئين السوريين لصالح 400,000 مستفيد على مدى 5 سنوات، ومبادرة علم طفلا التي بلغ عدد الأطفال المستفيدين منها حوالي 985,000 طفل. هذا بالإضافة إلى ما تقوم به مؤسسات المجتمع المدني القطرية. بالإضافة إلى ذلك تم لم شمل الآلاف من السوريين مع أسرهم المقيمة في دولة قطر. أصحاب السعادة، لا يمكن الحديث عن التداعيات الإنسانية للأزمة من ضحايا وأجيال ضائعة ولاجئين دون الحديث عن أهمية وضرورة إيقاف الانتهاكات الخطيرة للقانون الإنساني الدولي والقانون الدولي لحقوق الإنسان التي أفرزت تلك التداعيات، والتي لا زالت مستمرة إلى يومنا هذا سواء على يد النظام السوري أو تنظيم داعش، وهو ما توضحه تقارير الأمم المتحدة والمنظمات الدولية بمسؤولية قوات النظام وداعش عن استخدام الأسلحة الكيميائية ضد المدنيين. وأكد التقرير الأخير للجنة التحقيق الدولية المستقلة مسؤولية قوات النظام عن استخدام أسلحة كيميائية في بلدة خان شيخون في شهر أبريل الماضي. إن المساءلة عن هذه الفظائع والجرائم المرتكبة في سوريا هو مسؤولية على عاتق المجتمع الدولي من أجل تحقيق مبدأ العدالة وردع الجناح عن الاستمرار في ارتكاب تلك الجرائم، وإزالة العوائق أمام استدامة ونجاح حل الأزمة والانتقال السياسي والتوافق الوطني، وتوازيا مع تلبية احتياجات اللاجئين والنازحين السوريين والسعي نحو الانتقال السياسي. نود أن نشير إلى ضرورة التحضير منذ الآن لمرحلة ما بعد الحل السياسي ووقف العنف، والتي ستتطلب بذل جهود لدعم التعافي وإعادة الإعمار وإصلاح ما تدمر من البنى التحتية والمؤسسات الأساسية. ولا شك أن ذلك الدعم يتطلب وجود عملية سياسية ذات مصداقية تؤدي إلى انتقال سياسي مستدام، وهذا ما دعونا إليه منذ البداية، ونجدد هنا دعمنا للجهود الرامية للتوصل إلى حل سياسي للأزمة على أساس بيان جنيف 1 وقرارات مجلس الأمن بما فيها القرار 2254. وتحقيق تطلعات الشعب السوري في الأمن والاستقرار والوحدة أرضاً وشعباً، وتقرير مصيرهم وفقاً لإرادتهم دون الوقوع تحت أي ضغوط. وندعم الجهود الرامية لتحقيق التهدئة ومنع التصعيد ووضع حد للعنف وفق ميثاق الأمم المتحدة والقانون الدولي والقانون الإنساني الدولي، وآخرها المساعي الجارية في أستنا. كما نود التأكيد على أن تلك المساعي ليست بديلاً عن مفاوضات جنيف التي يجب استئنافها في أسرع وقت ممكن. ونطالب النظام بتحمل المسؤولية والتعامل بجدية مع هذه المفاوضات بدلاً من الاستهتار بأرواح الشعب السوري الشقيق. ونؤكد على أنه لإنجاح اتفاقات خفض التوتر من المهم تأمينها ودعم الاستقرار فيها بالاستفادة من المجالس المحلية. ونأمل بأن تجنب تلك الاتفاقات الشعب السوري مسلسلاً إضافياً من سفك الدماء وارتكاب الجرائم والفظائع البشعة. وشكراً.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Turkey, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu.
Thank you very much, Federica. I would like to thank you personally, you and Christos and the EU for hosting this important and timely event. Since the last UN General Assembly in last 1 year, the situation on the ground is much better. Thanks to Astana process and the cessation of the hostilities and de-escalation zones. And also thanks to the achievements that we have made in our fight against Daesh. But we need to do a lot more. First of all, to consolidate the ceasefire and to reach a political solution. Without a political solution, we cannot bring a stability and the security. And without security, we cannot help those vulnerable people now living in different parts of Syria as IDPs. And we cannot return the 5 million refugees living in the neighboring countries, including my country, to Syria. Therefore, political solution is a must. And we need to be also cautious with other terrorist organizations, not only Daesh. Particularly, YPG is forcing all the others to leave, Sunni Arabs and Kurds, opposition, to YPG. Now we are hosting 300,000 Syrian Kurds in my country, Turkey. And 90% of them actually were first by YPG because they are opposing YPG and YPG's ideology. So this is the situation, another situation in the country. So how are we going to rebuild the country? I know EU is interested a lot, and EU has the capacity. But I agree with Birger Brenda. So far, we pledged a lot, but we couldn't deliver much. This is the problem. And we also promised the neighboring countries a lot, but we haven't reimbursed as we pledged. So I don't want to talk about my country. We spent $30 billion. What we get from international community is only $520 million through United Nations. This is nothing. It doesn't mean that nobody wants to share the burden. Well done, Turkey. Well done, Lebanon. Well done, Jordan. You are doing a great job. We admire you. So what? Where is the burden sharing? EU pledged $3 billion to the refugees living in Turkey, so they shouldn't come to European Union, okay? Because you know that the cost of a refugee in Turkey or in Syria is 10 times cheaper than in Europe. But so far you have reimbursed only 820 million euros. What I am trying to say that this is an extraordinary situation. We cannot follow the typical procedures that you have. We have to be more practical. And when we bring the stability in Syria, we should be also very practical there so we can deliver what we promise and what we pledge. This is the issue. Now, after Euphrates Shield operation, more than 100,000 Syrians went back to those cities, El Bab and the others, Dabuk. So they want to go back. That's why they are still in Turkey. But the thing is, how are we going to return them, whether we can create the suitable conditions for those vulnerable people living around. And as Turkey, we will continue supporting EU affairs. We are ready to collaborate you better, and also with other countries who are very much interested. And I would like to thank all the countries, neighboring countries, Lebanon, Jordan, and the others, Iraq. Iraq is having its own problem, but still they maintain these open door policies for Syrian refugees as well. So we are very grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mevlut. And I would now pass the floor exactly to the ministers of Jordan and of Iraq following his intervention. Please, Minister Imad Fakouri, you have the floor.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. High Representative Mogherini, Commissioner Stylianides, Excellencies, all protocols observed, allow me to start sincerely by thanking the EU and our partners for holding our meeting today in the spirit of partnership and fair burden sharing. In cooperation with the United States and Russia, Jordan is working on establishing a de-escalation zone in the south of Syria. Our talks led to a ceasefire agreement that has held and ensured calm. We see this as a step toward achieving a comprehensive end of fighting across all Syria and towards reaching a political settlement that will guarantee the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Syria and that the Syrian people will accept. We also want the de-escalation zone to provide safety and decent living conditions. That means provision of necessary services. Accordingly, we hope that along with our international partners and the EU in particular, and to the extent that the political conditions and requirements allow, we can identify areas of support and projects that will improve people's lives. 7 years into the crisis, its protracted nature continues to challenge us all. Year in and year out, this crisis has been threatening Jordan's resilience and has pushed our absorptive capacity to its limits. Jordan today is not only hosting 1.37 million Syrians, but we are hosting cumulatively 2.9 million registered refugees with UNRWA and UNHCR, representing 13% of the world refugees, making us the highest registered refugee country in absolute and relative terms. The estimated direct cost of hosting Syrian refugees, according to the World Bank, has averaged about $2 billion annually, which is 5% of our annual GDP and 20% of our annual government revenue. And while we have been demonstrating resilience, we still faced with a very low economic growth situation, elevated debt levels, increasing unemployment, and very difficult social conditions. It is worth noting that Jordan since 2012 has also been forced to take fiscal and austerity measures cumulatively of about $4 billion at a time the economy has been growing for the past 6 years at 1/3 of the pre-crisis levels. As host country, we are truly the highest donor. Notwithstanding, Jordan has been setting a regional and global model in terms of dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis and carrying out a global public good. In addition to pioneering the critical resilience-based approaches with the development of the Jordan response plans and adopting a paradigm shift through the Jordan Compact, which has allowed Jordan and its international partners, thanks to all of you, to make significant strides in supporting Syrian refugees, host communities, and overall the development agenda of Jordan. We continue as Jordan to take our commitments under the Jordan Compact very seriously, and those in the Jordan Output document in Brussels. With your support, we have also accomplished a number of success stories that we must point to. This year, funding to the JRP is currently at around 18%. With what's in the pipeline, we hopefully should get close to 50%. In addition, 47% of the identified priority resilience projects were funded. We are working with the EU and the UN resident coordinator to ensure that the commitments made are translated not only into contracted projects before the end of the year, but also supporting the urgent host communities' capital expenditure priorities. We have been also allowing flexible employment schemes. As of last week, we crossed issuing 65,000 legal work permits to Syrians free of charge in camps and in host communities. We are also working on the Syrian refugees to develop their skills, especially in the vocational training area. And we have absorbed 90% of the Syrian boys and girls in schools, formal and informal and catch-up programs. And we just added this year another 50,000 slots. And we're working with our partners to create outreach and communication campaigns, house by house, to as many Syrian families to ensure that our obligations on having no Syrian generation lost and leaving no one behind for the Syrians is actually maximized, and we get the maximum or any remaining children in child labor or early marriages out of those things. In spite of the good successes, the challenges and gaps remain huge with economic siege given the regional instability. Going forward, I would like to stress that the international community needs to continue on an annual basis to fully implement its commitments as per the Jordan Compact and the Jordan Output Document. Sustained support and investment in Jordan's economic stability and security is becoming more pressing. 7 years into the crisis and being under a severe austerity IMF program, Jordan does not have any fiscal space to expand investing its development gains whilst continuing to provide services to increasingly more vulnerable refugees and host communities at sustained levels. Therefore, Jordan must continue to be provided with the sustained sufficient flow of grants to fund the Jordan Response Plan to cover both refugee and resilience needs at a minimum to the 2016 levels we had agreed to in Brussels. Increased budgetary support grants and concessionary financing, inclusive of the World Bank's Global Concessionary Financing Facility and the EU External Investment Plan funding modality, hopefully that we look forward to tap into. Assistance must take into account several factors: the lack of any remaining fiscal space, the high proportion of refugees in the population, the large percentage of refugees in host communities, the relatively low income level of Jordan relative to all other neighbors, the severe depletion of our public services, the growing operations and maintenance cost of the expanding needs and infrastructural capital expenditures, and our saturated absorptive capacity and stretched social cohesion of our host communities. This support must factor in also the remaining requirements under the IMF program in 2018 and 2019, and the need to space out their severe cumulative burden on our public. Finally, deeper cooperation, hopefully with the EU and many of you as partners, is urgently needed to scale up and accelerate Jordan's benefiting from the export and investment pillar under the Jordan Compact related to the simplification of the rules of origin with the EU, which we started to get some of the fruits of that. We call on the donors to agree for 2018 and the UN on the next 3RP resource mobilization event. As my good friend Filippo has mentioned, this is critical, hopefully. This year we held it in Finland, and we hope we can determine where we hold that next year. And I thank Madam Mogherini also for announcing I was going to call for making sure we hold the equivalent of Kuwait or London or Brussels next year, because I think on an annual basis we need to sustain this effort. And it is important also to start thinking of the role of host countries who have gotten the brunt after the refugees, obviously themselves, of this crisis, on the role they can play effectively to help in the rebuilding of Syria and the rest of the region, of course, when the conditions allow for that, and also working all of us together on the conditions that would allow Syrian refugees to return to their country in accordance with applicable norms and international law, and as the circumstances allow it. Once again, thank you to the EU for all its efforts, and we sincerely thank all our donor partners and the UN for their continued and increased support and partnership and their commitment to invest in the Jordan model. We look forward to continuing our partnership and hard work together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, you personally and Jordan. I now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Iraq, Ibrahim Al-Jafari.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. معالي رئيسة الجلسة المحترمة السيدة فيدريكا موغريني، السادة ممثلو الدول والمنظمات المشاركة، السادة الحضور، السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله. كان من دواعي سروري حضور مؤتمر بروكسل خلال نيسان الماضي الخاص بدعم ومساندة مستقبل سوريا. كما أتقدم إليكم بخالص الشكر وموفور التقدير لدعوتكم الكريمة ولإتاحة الفرصة للمشاركة في الملتقى الوزاري الذي يستضيفه الاتحاد الأوروبي الخاص بمناقشة التقدم في تطبيق الالتزامات التي تم الاتفاق عليها في مؤتمر بروكسل والتحديات التي يواجهها، وكذلك لمناقشة الجهود الحالية للحد من العنف. أود من هذا المنبر أن أؤكد على بعض النقاط الخاصة بموقف العراق من هذه الأزمة. أولاً، أن العراق منذ بدء الأزمة في سوريا عام 2011 كان وما يزال فاعلاً إيجابياً لحل الأزمة السورية، وقد أعلن صراحة بأن لا حل غير الحل السياسي في سوريا، إذ أصبح جلياً أن الحل السياسي وحده سيساهم في إرساء نظام ديمقراطي تعددي يلبي المطالب المشروعة للشعب السوري ويحافظ على سوريا دولة موحدة وقوية ومستقرة. ثانياً، أن العراق يشيد بإرادة الاتحاد الأوروبي في المشاركة الجدية بإعمار سوريا عند تبني الحال السياسي وتحقيق السلام والديمقراطية وفقاً لما ورد في استراتيجية الاتحاد الأوروبي من إجراءات تتمثل برفع التدابير التقييدية واستئناف التعاون مع سوريا وحشد التمويل. ثالثاً، أن النجاح في تحقيق الأمن والسلام والاستقرار والديمقراطية في سوريا له نتائج إيجابية بكل تأكيد على العالم عامة وعلى العراق خاصة، ومن أهم نتائجه هي دحر الإرهاب وترسيخ الديمقراطية وحقوق الإنسان في المنطقة، وهذا بدوره سيؤدي إلى الحد من ظاهرة الهجرة واللجوء. رابعاً، يرى العراق أن نجاح استراتيجية الاتحاد الأوروبي للحل السياسي والسلام والاستقرار والديمقراطية في سوريا يتطلب جهداً وتعاوناً دولياً لتجفيف منابع الإرهاب والكف عن تسليح وتمويل الجماعات الإرهابية المسلحة ودعمها. خامساً، أن من مصلحة العراق إرساء نظام ديمقراطي تعددي في سوريا يعبر عن حقوق وتطلعات الشعب السوري في تقرير مصيره وبناء دولته، وأن الانتصارات التي سطرها العراق على تنظيم داعش الإرهابي والجماعات الإرهابية الأخرى تصب في مصلحة أمن واستقرار سوريا والمنطقة والعالم كله. لذا فإن الدعم السياسي والاقتصادي في عملية إعادة الإعمار والاستقرار في المناطق المحررة من العراق ما هو إلا دعم لسلام وأمن واستقرار المنطقة. هنا أود أن أثني على كل جهد ساهم ويساهم في كسر شوكة الإرهاب سواء داخل سوريا أم خارجها، كما أغتنم هذه الفرصة لشكر كل من ساهم ماديا وسياسيا وإنسانيا وعسكريا وأمنيا في تحقيق النصر العراقي ضد تنظيم داعش الإرهابي، وأتمنى لهذا الملتقى النجاح وتحقيق الأهداف المرجوة، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Shukran Jazira. I'll now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Iran, Mohammad Javad Zarif, followed by Russia.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Let me begin by expressing my thanks and appreciation to you, Federica, for convening this meeting, and to the European Union for your efforts in this regard. We have stated since the beginning of this crisis that the crisis needs a political solution. As my colleague from Turkey pointed out, we are happy that since the last General Assembly, we have seen some developments, at least in the area of de-escalation. The agreements in the latest Astana meeting made it possible for us to station observers on the ground, hopefully to assist not only in the de-escalation, but with humanitarian assistance. What is needed for the international community is to redouble its efforts to get humanitarian assistance to all Syrians who have been displaced internally and externally, and we thank the neighboring countries who have hosted millions of Syrian refugees in their countries. We continue to believe that a political solution based on the principles enshrined in Resolution 2254 could indeed end this humanitarian nightmare. We insist on the need for ceasefire, the need to combat terrorism together, and we have made great progress in dealing with that catastrophe that has affected our region and the world. We also need for an inclusive government, intra-Syrian dialogue, leading to a political solution and an election. We believe that's the only way out, and we need to redouble our efforts. We also need to establish peace dividends for all Syrians to believe that there is a future for them. And I believe all of us, and particularly the sponsors of this meeting, can in fact play a leading role in making that future possible. But in order to get there, we all need to commit ourselves that there will be no solution to Syria other than a political solution. I believe that's a starting point that we all need to really believe in. Thank you.
Thank you, Javad. I now pass the floor to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Russia, Gennady Katilov.
Благодарю вас, госпожа председатель. Уважаемые коллеги, обстановка в Сирии действительно претерпевает серьезные изменения. Удалось радикально снизить уровень насилия, улучшить гуманитарную ситуацию, повысить эффективность борьбы с террористами. Территория, занимаемая ИГИЛ, сжимается. Ликвидирован опаснейший очаг под Дейр-эз-Зором. Российские воздушно-космические силы продолжают оказывать эффективную помощь сирийским войскам в ликвидации террористической угрозы. Мы всегда подчеркивали, что урегулирование сирийского кризиса лежит исключительно в политико-дипломатической плоскости. Россия совместно с Ираном и Турцией при активном содействии Казахстана был инициирован Астанинский процесс, где наблюдателями выступают также Соединенные Штаты, Иордания и ООН. В результате созданы 4 зоны деэскалации на юго-западе Сирии, в Восточной Гуте, на севере провинции Хомс и в провинции Идлиб. Мы высоко оцениваем взаимодействие с американскими и иорданскими партнерами, благодаря которым удалось стабилизировать обширный район на юго-западе Сирии. Отмечаем также роль Египта, способствовавшего началу функционирования зон деэскалации в Восточной Гуте и на севере Хомса. На недавно состоявшейся международной встрече по Сирии в Астане оформление всех 4 зон деэскалации было завершено. Создан трехсторонний иордано-российский турецкий координационный центр. Решаются вопросы размещения контрольно-пропускных и контрольно-наблюдательных пунктов. Определен мандат развертывания сил контроля деэскалации в целях предотвращения инцидентов между конфликтующими сторонами. Процесс в Астане действительно придал динамику межсирийскому диалогу под эгидой ООН. Надо сказать, что зона деэскалации – это временные меры. Они созданы на 6 месяцев с возможностью продления, если будет в этом необходимость. При этом ни в коей мере не должно создаваться ощущение, что это своего рода прелюдия к последующему расчленению Сирии или ее разделу на зоны влияния. Свидетельством добавочной стоимости астанинского формата является стремление ряда государств не только принять участие в его работе, но и внести вклад в нормализацию обстановки в стране, в том числе в гуманитарном плане. Сегодня важно поддержать усилия в пользу формирования единой представительной делегации оппозиции, которая на общей конструктивной платформе могла бы выступить в Женеве в прямые переговоры с правительственной командой. Мы поддерживаем соответствующие инициативы Саудовской Аравии. Считаем необходимым обеспечить участие в диалоге с правительством СААР представителей курдов. Отстранение их от поиска путей урегулирования может заложить мину замедленного действия под будущее не только самой Сирии, но и всего региона. Надо сказать, что непреходящую ценность имеет работа международной группы поддержки Сирии и ее целевых групп. В ходе обсуждения новых возможных форм взаимодействия по Сирии считаем необходимым во главу угла ставить эффективность в достижении целей, поставленных резолюцией 2254. Иными словами, нужно настраиваться на развитие позитивных тенденций и двигаться вперед. При этом мы уверены, что в любой работе, затрагивающей интересы сирийского государства, должны принимать участие представители правительства Сирии. Как, собственно, это происходит в Астане и Женеве. И еще один важный аспект. В нынешних условиях, когда в свои дома, в том числе в зонах деэскалации, возвращаются сотни тысяч людей, требуется финансировать гуманитарная помощь, объемная, по линии ООН и другим каналам. Сюда входит и содействие в восстановлении школ, больниц, объектов жизнеобеспечения. Потребности Сирии в преддверии освобождения страны от иностранных террористов огромные. Остро стоит проблема гуманитарного разминирования. Российские военные делают все возможное для того, чтобы помочь сирийцам в этом деле и, соответственно, не допустить новых жертв среди ни в чем не повинных людей. Необходимо, чтобы к этой работе активно подключалась ООН, другие страны, желающие оказывать помощь сирийскому народу. Политизация же вопроса оказания содействия и ссылки на необходимость дождаться завершения политического процесса неприемлемы. Ведь мы все понимаем, что речь идет о судьбах сотен тысяч, если не миллионов сирийцев, живущих в крайне стесненных условиях, усугубляемых, надо сказать, действиями односторонних санкций. Благодарю вас.
Thank you. Now I give the floor to the Minister of State of UK, Alistair Burt.
Thank you. High Representative, thank you. Distinguished Commissioners, Excellencies and colleagues. I want to thank the European Union for hosting this significant event. The UK were pleased to be associated with the earlier Brussels conference. I would start by offering our thanks to Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey and Iraq, who've shown enormous generosity in hosting millions of refugees with very broad shoulders, the highest numbers in the world. We recognise the immense strain this brings and the need for a collective long-term response, and will continue to support them. I would, however, like to direct the rest of my remarks to Syria in particular, but their contributions should certainly form an important part of our work going forward. For over 6 years now, civilians have borne the brunt of the Syrian conflict. All too often, humanitarian and health workers have been killed while trying to help. Just 2 days ago, we heard reports of appalling attacks by pro-regime forces on medical facilities in rural southern Idlib and Hama. My thoughts and condolences are with all those killed during this attack and with all Syrians who continue to suffer. The attack on Tuesday is a stark reminder that Syria is a man-made crisis. We're not dealing with a series of unfortunate consequences that have befallen the people of Syria. The vast majority of people are dying or being injured not by starvation or disease, but by bullets and artillery shells. The scale of unnecessary human suffering is difficult to comprehend. Over half of Syria's population has been displaced by the violence. Over 5 million people have fled to the safety of neighbouring countries. 13.6 million people are in urgent need of humanitarian assistance in Syria. Over 4.5 million of these are trapped in what are euphemistically known as hard-to-reach areas. They are not hard to reach. Aid could flow into them today if parties to the conflict and those who support them would allow that aid to go in. The United Kingdom is clear that the Assad regime bears overwhelming responsibility for the appalling suffering in Iraq. From the murder of children and the dumping of their bodies in the streets in the early days of peaceful efforts for reform to the chemical weapons attacks, the regime is responsible for the vast majority of civilian deaths. It is within its power today to allow aid to reach millions of people in desperate need. Over 90% of those living under siege are surrounded by the regime and its allies. And the point of saying this is to give the United Kingdom's clear view about the timing of aid and future support. While getting aid to those who need it is essential, aid cannot solve the problem. We need an end to the violence. We support any genuine initiative that seeks to reduce the violence, but what we really need is a nationwide cessation of hostilities that supports efforts to reach an inclusive end. We need to see the regime and its allies engage meaningfully to this end. At that point, we will be ready with reconstruction assistance, but only at that point. We all want to see the suffering end and Syria rebuilt. Ending the violence and achieving an inclusive political settlement are critical steps towards this. But while the humanitarian situation is so desperate, we must prioritize saving lives by meeting immediate humanitarian and protection needs. Only humanitarian assistance is in line with established principles, which are not currently being adhered to. There can be no support for reconstruction until credible political transition is firmly underway. And we support Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura's tireless efforts to this end. It is indeed to be seen as a reward for peace, not as a reward for a regime which has destroyed its own cities and people. The United Kingdom has committed £2.46 billion in humanitarian support. We've allocated over 90% of our 2017 pledge and are on track to deliver fully by the end of the year. We are focusing on meeting immediate humanitarian needs because that is the greatest priority. Where genuine opportunities exist that contribute to efforts to achieve political transition, we will support stabilization activity that can help improve people's lives. We all need to step up. The international community came together in Brussels this year and pledged £9.7 billion to support Syria and the region. This will make a real difference, but as others have noted, the UN appeals remain underfunded. All those who committed to contribute must deliver on their promises, and those who've contributed little to the response to date should consider what more they can do. Syria is a man-made crisis, and it's within the power of man to end it. The people of Syria and the region have suffered enough. We need to see an end to the violence and an inclusive political settlement that delivers transition to a new government that can bring the country back together again. The UN-led talks represent the only path towards a sustainable peace. We strongly support the efforts of Staffan and look forward to the resumption of talks in Geneva. So the UK will continue to do all that we can to meet humanitarian needs and support efforts to find a long-term, lasting solution to the crisis that brings the suffering of the Syrian people to an end. But to forget why that suffering is going on is to miss an important point. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Alistair, and thank you and your government for having hosted the London conference last year. I would now give the floor to the Secretary General of the Arab League, Abu Ghait, followed by the Foreign Minister of Belgium.
شكرا السيدة موغريني. أتفق مع الآراء القائلة أن النزاع السوري يدخل مرحلة جديدة، وإن كنت أعتقد أن هزيمة داعش قريبة، إلا أن القضاء النهائي على هذا التنظيم الإرهابي سوف يحتاج وقتا وربما وقتا طويلا، لأنه سوف يتحول إلى حرب عصابات وغيرها من عمليات. هناك اقتناع متزايد لدى أطراف مختلفة بعبثية الاستمرار في الحرب. أتمنى أن يترسخ هذا الإدراك، لأن تلك بالضبط هي النقطة التي تبدأ عندها جهود التسوية الجادة للحروب الأهلية. المأمول هو أن يدرك أطراف النزاع أنفسهم أن الكل خاسر من وراء استمرار الحرب وعدم قدرة أي طرف على إحراز النصر كامل. الجامعة العربية تشجع كل جهد يبذل من أجل خفض التصعيد ووقف إطلاق النار وتسهيل دخول المساعدات الإنسانية للمناطق المحاصرة. ندرك أن الوضع ليس مثاليا في المناطق المشمولة بمثل هذه الاتفاقات، إلا أنه يظل أفضل مما كان عليه الحال في السابق. من ناحية أخرى أؤكد أن هذه الترتيبات من أجل خفض التصعيد لا يمكن ولا ينبغي لها أن تمهد لأوضاع دائمة تنطوي على تقسيم فعلي للوطن السوري، أو أن ترسم حدودا مستقبلية، أو تحدد مناطق نفوذ مستقرة لهذه القوى أو تلك على الجغرافيا السورية. إننا نتمسك بسوريا الموحدة ذات السيادة بحدودها القائمة كما عرفناها خلال القرن المنصرم. إن سوريا المستقبل ينبغي أن تكون صاحبة سيادة حقيقية على أراضيها، لا مكان فيها للميليشيات الأجنبية أو للمقاتلين الأجانب، ولا وجود على أرضها للجماعات الإرهابية، وهذه نقطة فاصلة في المشهد السوري. نؤيد الأفكار التي تربط بين إعادة الإعمار والتسوية السياسية، واقتناعنا الراسخ أن الحل السياسي الشامل يظل المدخل الوحيد لإنهاء النزاع في سوريا والتمهيد لاستعادة الحياة الطبيعية في هذا البلد الذي انهكته الحرب. أؤيد جهود المبعوث الأممي من أجل توحيد المعارضة السورية للتأسيس لعملية سياسية شاملة بمرجعية بيان جنيف 1 وقرار مجلس الأمن 2245. وآمل أن تفرز هذه العملية وضعاً يلبي طموحات الشعب السوري ويحافظ على استقرار الوطن في الوقت ذاته. أخيراً، نشكر الدول المستضيفة للاجئين السوريين وندعمهم في مواقفهم الإنسانية ونطالب بمزيد من الدعم لهم. وشكراً سيادة الرئيسة.
Thank you, and I'll give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Belgium, followed by the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross.
Thank you, Federica, and thank you for hosting such a very important event. The crisis in Syria has evolved over the years from an uprising against a dictator to a multidimensional conflict, and today the conflict is entering yet another stage. So-called de-escalation zones are being put in place, and Daesh is drastically losing ground. The imminent liberation of Raqqa brings up the challenge of reestablishing a post-Daesh local governance that reflects all components of the local population. It is essential to avoid the resurgence of a Daesh bis in any shape or form. This requires that all the population feels included in shaping the future of their community. Of course, the humanitarian challenges remain enormous, and I want to repeat what was said by the previous speakers, and we need to go further, maybe with a new meeting in Brussels next year, but we need certainly to deliver after the pledging session in London and in Brussels. And I want also to pay tribute to those countries hosting so many refugees in the region, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, but also Iraq, and I'm sure that it's important to help those countries. The reduction in violence cannot lead to the illusion that somehow a sustainable status quo has been reached. The international community cannot lose interest and let the current fragmentation of Syria entrench itself. Only an overall political solution can be the basis for a permanent settlement to the conflict. So now is precisely the time to give a renewed impetus to the search for such a solution, for a transition toward a long-term national reconciliation and reunification of Syria. That political agreements should, of course, first and foremost be defined by the Syrians themselves and address the humanitarian needs and the interests of the Syrian population. The political process under the guidance of the UN envoy Staffan de Mistura is the appropriate forum for this. But it also needs and deserves to be supported by the political backing and active encouragement of all relevant regional and international actors. The French initiative to set up an international contact group for Syria can provide a useful framework to bring them together to stimulate the political process. Belgium is heavily engaged bilaterally and through the European Union in supporting the Syrian population and refugees with humanitarian aid. It also stands ready to support with its EU partners the reconstruction of Syria. This will, however, only be possible once a long-term perspective is provided by the start of a credible political transition. Finally, Federica, Belgium has consistently been advocating for accountability for all the crimes against international humanitarian law committed in the course of the conflict. The recent conclusions of the Commission of Inquiry of the UN on the Khan Sheikhoun incident have once again proven that we need to persevere on that path, holding accountable those, including Bashar al-Assad, who are responsible for the most heinous of crimes is a collective responsibility of all states and will be crucial for a long-term stability of Syria. And thank you.
Thank you, Didier. I now give the floor to the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, Peter Maurer, followed by Lebanon.
High Representatives, Excellencies, dear colleagues, throughout the long years of conflict in Syria, the ICRC has been present working closely with the people of Syria to understand their needs and challenges and to adapt our response in the light of their changing needs. We have worked closely with our dedicated colleagues in the Syrian Arab Red Crescent and other movement partners, bringing food, water, shelter, medicine whenever we can. At the moment, we are seeing a shift in dynamics. In one town, people are being forced to flee the fighting, but just kilometers away, the situation is relatively tranquil and people are moving back to rebuild their lives. One group needs shelter, food, blankets. The other group needs for the taps to be turned on, for electricity and medical services to operate. In other words, there are simultaneously needs in the short term and needs in the medium and long terms. They are individual and systemic. They evolve as circumstances change. It's imperative that we are close to people to understand their needs and be accountable to them rather than impose solutions. It's likely that the pace of returns will pick up in the coming weeks and months. The ICRC believes returns should be voluntary and represent a lasting and sustainable solution. In any case, return must be in respect of the principle of non-refoulement, assessed on an individual basis. Linked to this are the so-called de-escalation or safe zones. We must be cautious with the assumption that these zones are actually safer for civilians. The normal safeguards for safe and voluntary return of both displaced people and refugees have to be in place. However, the conflict in Syria is not yet over, and while it continues, three critically important issues need to be addressed. First, we cannot turn a blind eye to how hostilities have been conducted. International humanitarian law has been flouted on countless occasions. In the cities of Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor, as conflict continues, parties must respect and protect civilians trapped by the violence. Inhabitants must be spared and allowed free and safe passage if they want to leave. And, of course, the principles applies throughout Syria. Second, the issue of displacement, one of the central tragedies of this conflict. Millions of people forced to move, sometimes on multiple occasions. Internally displaced people must be protected as much as possible from the effects of war. They must have adequate shelter, hygiene, health, safety and nutrition, and everything must be done to ensure that families are not separated. Thirdly, the missing. There are so many families who do not know what happened to their loved ones. The authorities must clarify the fate of those missing as soon as possible. This process must begin now. We cannot wait until the fighting has stopped. The best start into clarification is the unhindered access of the ICRC to all detainees held in the context of hostilities in the whole territory of Syria by any actors and according to our proven modalities. Dear colleagues, the fighting and the suffering in Syria will continue for some time yet. Our guiding line must be the welfare and the recovery of a people devastated by conflict. Keep their interest central, and there is hope for a better future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, also for the work you're doing on the ground. Very precious. I now give the floor for Lebanon to Ambassador Nawaf Salam, followed by the United States.
At the outset, to convey the appreciation of my government for your efforts at holding this timely and useful high-level meeting. Lebanon welcomed the significant reduction in violence in Syria since the signing of Memorandum of Understanding on de-escalation zones in Astana last May. We commend the government of Kazakhstan, and we support the continued efforts of the co-sponsors of the Astana process to maintain the ceasefire and facilitate humanitarian access throughout the country. The international community should build on this relative progress on the ground and reunite behind the UN-led efforts to reach a political solution to the crisis based on the relevant Security Council resolutions, a solution that meets the aspirations of the Syrian people to live in peace and dignity in a sovereign, unified country, and which paved the way to launch the long and costly reconstruction process and the return in safety and dignity of the millions of refugees and internally displaced persons to their homes and livelihoods. Until the goals of such return of refugees is achieved, host countries like Lebanon will continue to need the support of the international community to tackle the complex economic, social, environmental, and security challenges that have emerged in recent years as a result of the influx of millions of refugees due to the crisis. The impact on my country alone has been immense, slowing economic growth, increasing unemployment and poverty levels, and overburdening infrastructure in various sectors, including healthcare, education, housing, electricity, water, sanitation, and transport. The World Bank estimates that the cumulative cost to Lebanon's economy of the ongoing crisis in Syria stood in 2015 at around $18 billion in terms of lower GDP growth plus $4.2 billion in terms of lower revenues. In confronting these formidable challenges, Lebanon requires international support beyond the narrow prism of humanitarian assistance. Longer-term development financing in the form of concessional loans and grants or flexible investment loans is essential to deal with the protracted refugee crisis of such magnitude and depth. This financing will be used in upgrading Lebanon's overstretched infrastructure with priority given to the education, sanitation, electricity, and transportation sectors to meet the needs of both refugees and their host communities. Finally, Madam High Representative, a thriving and prosperous Syria is indispensable for the health and progress of our region, and its revival is vital for the interests of my own country due to historical, social, economic, trade, and human ties that have connected us. It is in this light that Lebanon stands ready to assist and contribute in due time to the post-conflict reconstruction effort. Would be happy to share our experience and knowledge in this regard. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, and thanks for all the resilience your country is showing. I now give the floor to the Assistant Secretary of the United States, Stephen Arshow, followed by Bahrain.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is an honor to be here today with this important group to reaffirm the commitments we made in April. We commend the EU's leadership in convening this group in April and again today. We appreciate and thank the EU and its member states for their critical contributions in the fight against ISIS and their humanitarian and stabilization assistance for areas liberated from ISIS. The humanitarian situation in the Syria region remains dire. An estimated 13.5 million people remain in need inside Syria, including 6.3 million IDPs throughout the country, and over 5.2 million refugees are displaced in neighboring countries. The trauma from this terrible conflict is shocking and will persist until a political solution is reached. The United States has 3 goals in Syria. First, defeat ISIS and provide assistance to stabilize liberated areas. Second, de-escalate the violence of the core regime opposition conflict to reduce the suffering of the Syrian people and preserve the opposition. And in doing so, third, create conditions for a political transition that the majority of Syrians can accept. And that clearly means a future for Syria without Bashar al-Assad. The Syrian conflict has evolved substantially since we convened in Brussels in April. The United States and the international coalition, working with our partners' forces on the grounds, are accelerating the fight against ISIS. The core humanitarian challenges, however, remain access and security. Nevertheless, the United Nations and our international organization and NGO partners are responding and have reached many people in need, but continued support will be needed. In the Southwest, we are working closely with Jordan and Russia. Together, we have established a ceasefire arrangement to reduce violence, allow for safer access for humanitarian partners, support stabilization efforts, and preserve the opposition's voice. Nearly 3 months later, there is now evidence that it is possible to tamp down violence and begin to allow people to return to some semblance of normalcy. In July, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which is led by al-Qaeda's Syrian wing, effectively took over much of northwestern Syria, placing the welfare of some 3 million civilians at the whim of al-Qaeda. We are aware of the recent agreement reached by the Astana guarantees on the deployment of observers to a de-escalation area in Idlib during the Astana talks last week. The United States supports any genuine effort that may de-escalate the violence in Syria, and we will continue to monitor developments. Yet the regime's resumption of airstrikes on hospitals and schools in Idlib this week is a troubling reminder of the precarious nature of these arrangements, which will only give further benefit to al-Qaeda to play spoiler. Meanwhile, the Assad regime and its allies continue to attack besieged opposition enclaves in eastern Ghouta and northern Homs, despite nominal ceasefire arrangements in place. We commend the efforts of UN Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura and his team for maintaining focus and perseverance towards seeking a political resolution of the conflict. We continue to urge both sides to engage constructively in political talks. We thank Syria's neighbors, particularly Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon, for the indispensable role in providing safety to millions who have fled violence. Their continued generosity has improved the lives of Syrians amidst adverse conditions. In this spirit, the United States is pleased to announce today more than $697 million in new humanitarian assistance, $697 million in new humanitarian assistance to those affected by the Syria crisis, which brings our fiscal year 2017 total to more than $1.4 billion. We saw impressive commitments in Brussels to address humanitarian needs, and we must build on that generosity to serve those impacted by the conflict. This funding, through international organizations and non-governmental organizations, will provide critical, life-saving assistance to millions in need in Syria and in the region. This brings the total U.S. humanitarian funding to nearly $7.4 billion since the start of the crisis. As the renewal of UN Security Council Resolution 2165 approaches, we must expand access for our humanitarian partners. Cross-border assistance is a lifeline for millions of civilians and must be preserved, particularly in the face of the regime's efforts to block the UN and its partners from reaching areas it besieges. We must continue to demand better, more expansive access, and urge all parties to allow humanitarian aid to reach those most in need. Madam Chair, let me thank you and the European Union for hosting this conference. As we said in April, our message is simple. Together, we will remain dedicated to supporting the Syrian people.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the quite remarkable announcement you've brought us today. I think this is a good demonstration of the fact that we need to keep sustaining the aid and keep delivering the aid. And this shows also the fact that conferences like this, in between bigger conferences are helpful and bring concrete results. Thank you for this. I now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Bahrain, Sheikh Khalid bin Hamad bin Mohammed Al Khalifa, followed by the Holy See.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Excellency Federica Mogherini, Excellencies, distinguished guests, I'd like to thank you, Federica, for hosting this high-level meeting at a crucial time for Syria and the region. I agree with you and all those who spoke before me on the urgency of addressing the political, economic, and humanitarian crisis in Syria. I reiterate my country's position on the urgent need to strengthen cooperation between all relevant global players and responsible regional countries to work towards a final political solution based on UN Security Council Resolution 2254 and the 2012 Geneva Communique that respects the will of the Syrian people and places Syria back on the path of security and stability. In this regard, we commend the efforts of His Excellency Mr. Stefan de Mistura, Special Envoy of the Secretary General of the UN for Syria, and the outcomes of the talk at Astana, particularly the agreement on establishing de-escalation zones in various parts of Syria. We must, however, be vigilant in ensuring the adherence of all countries to the Astana Agreement and in not allowing countries to use the agreement to further territorial ambitions or back domestic militias. We look forward to the day where a permanent ceasefire is achieved and all relevant parties are negotiating in good faith to chart a new path for the future. I must also stress the importance of preserving the territorial integrity of the Syrian state. Compromising it will undoubtedly add further instability to an already difficult situation. On the humanitarian front, we all agree that this is the worst human disaster since the Second World War. More than 70 years ago, and all of us must do what we can to help. Bahrain has done and will continue to do its part to aid our brothers and sisters in Syria. We have constructed an educational complex comprising 4 schools in Al-Za'atari refugee camp in Jordan, with the capacity to absorb thousands of students. 70% of the school children in the Za'atari camp are currently being educated in those schools. Based on the success of the Za'atari schools, we have built new schools in Irbid and Abu Nasr, serving more than 2,000 children. We have also constructed homes serving thousands of refugees in Za'atari, and a social center to help children deal with the psychological and social trauma of the tragedies they have unfortunately been subjected to. None of this would have been possible without the incredible efforts and sacrifice by the government of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Iraq, and Egypt to accommodate large numbers of refugees and provide them with aid and social services so they may resume their lives as best as they could given the circumstances. Going forward, we need to take all necessary measures to ensure that aid reaches all affected areas within Syria without hindrance or delay. The Syrian government must take responsibility for any obstacle preventing aid from reaching those who deserve it. We urge the international community to increase pressure on the Syrian government to achieve this, as well as providing the necessary support for countries taking on the burden for hosting and providing for our Syrian brothers and sisters. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Secretary for Relations with States of the Holy See, Reverend Gallagher, followed by the Foreign Minister of Portugal.
Thank you, Madam High Representative, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I would like at the very outset to convey the deep appreciation of Pope Francis to all who tirelessly toil to find a political solution to the conflict in Syria and to assist in every way the victims of the senseless war. He encourages every effort toward the pursuit of the political process to end the conflict. Since the beginning of the crisis, the the Holy See has always remained deeply concerned about the tremendous human suffering affecting millions of innocent children and other civilians who remain deprived of essential goods and services. In the overall effort to limit the immense suffering the conflict has been inflicting on the population, humanitarian workers must have rapid, safe, and unhindered access wherever there are people in need. The Holy See urges that the international humanitarian law be fully respected, particularly with regard to the protection of civilian populations and infrastructure. Furthermore, the Holy See also expresses its concern for the conditions and treatment of prisoners and detainees. The Holy See, through the various charitable agencies of the Catholic Church, has been responding to the humanitarian crisis in Syria and the region from the very beginning. In 2016, the Holy See and the Catholic Church contributed to providing $200 million of humanitarian assistance of direct benefit to more than 4.6 million people in Syria and the surrounding region. In distributing aid, Catholic agencies and entities make no distinction regarding the religious or ethnic identity of those requiring assistance and give priority to the most vulnerable and most in need. Given the continuing overwhelming humanitarian needs, the Holy See continues to join its voice to the appeals for increased funding to help refugees and impacted host countries, in particular Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Turkey, and Egypt. I wish to give assurances of the commitment of the Catholic Church to continue its humanitarian assistance in the coming year. The rights of all Syrians must be protected. The rule of law, including respect for religious freedom and equality before the law, based on the principle of citizenship, regardless of one's race, ethnic origin, or religion, is fundamental for the achievement and maintenance of the peaceful and fruitful coexistence among individuals and communities in Syria and beyond. A credible, mutually agreed, intra-Syrian political solution to the ongoing conflict, with the construction and impartial support of the international community, is fundamental for the achievement of a durable peace in Syria and of a harmonious coexistence among all its ethnic and religious communities. As we move toward the peaceful resolution of the conflict, let us not diminish our solicitude and commitment for Syria and its beloved people. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Portugal, Augusto dos Santos Silva, followed by the Foreign Minister of Finland.
Thank you. Portugal fully supports the ongoing efforts of Special Envoy Stefan de Mistura and strongly values the reach-out efforts by you, Federica, towards regional key actors and partners. The situation of refugees and internally displaced persons in Syria is particularly appalling and in urgent need of a comprehensive approach. Daily gross violations of human rights and international and humanitarian law keep on taking place. Last April, Portugal pledged an additional contribution allocated to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. We reiterate the need to promote accountability for those responsible for all violations of international humanitarian law. On the other hand, education is among the axes of intervention that Portugal gives priority, since it enables Syrians to act as catalysts for the recovery and rebuilding of its country and to build resilience in long term. Portugal is then a staunch supporter, both politically and financially, of the Global Platform for Syrian Students, initiative of our former President Jorge Sampaio. I am pleased to announce that the Emergency Scholarship Program will be enlarged once again, doubling the number of scholarships to be awarded for the upcoming academic year, thanks to new partnerships. We are confident that the international community, led by the UN efforts, will help facilitate the preparatory work towards a lasting peaceful solution to the present conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Augusto. Also, thank you for this announcement that I think will make the difference for many young Syrians. And I now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Finland, Timo Soini, followed by the Foreign Minister of Slovenia.
Thank you, Federica. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we as an international community have not been able to do enough in Syria. Despite negotiations in Geneva and Astana and the recent de-escalation areas, the humanitarian situation in Syria remains very poor. The government of Syria bears the major responsibility of the access of the humanitarian aid. Many regional and global players have influence over the Syrian parties to the conflict. It's time they use it to save lives of civilians, women and children. We know that the lasting solution to the conflict can only be achieved through an inclusive political process under the auspices of the United Nations. This is not happening in spite of the tireless efforts by Staffan de Mistura, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for Syria. In the beginning of this year, Finland has the honor to host the Supporting Syrians and Region Conference in Helsinki, where the UN highlighted the humanitarian priorities for Syria and launched the regional refugee and resilience plans for 2017 and 18. I sincerely hope that the pledges that were made in Helsinki and in April in Brussels will be delivered. I rejoice about the announcements in this very meeting from the countries who have informed and made the new money pledges to this to solve this humanitarian catastrophe. I think that is very important and very respectful. Ladies and gentlemen, violations of the human rights and international humanitarian law in Syria are not acceptable. My key message is that at least the Syrian people deserve justice. We, the international community, have not been able to prevent the conflict or to resolve it. So this is the least we can and need to do for now. A step to the right direction when too many steps have been taken to the wrong direction. Therefore, Finland has lent her support to the international, impartial and independent mechanism for the crimes committed in Syria. The work of the Independent International Commission of Inquiry on the Syrian gives a clear picture of the atrocities. There is a strong need for dialogue and reconciliation, but without accountability, that will be difficult.
Thank you, Timo. I now give the floor to the Foreign Minister of Slovenia, Karl Erjavec, followed by France.
Minister, Excellencies, first I would like to thank Federica for organizing this important meeting and for keeping Syria high on our agenda. It's essential that the international community continues with effort to end this crisis. Our united fight against Daesh is giving positive result. Hopefully we are close to liberation of Iraq and Syria. This will be an important moment. All parties in Syria must commit to peace and to find a lasting political solutions. This is the only sustainable way forward. We must ensure, together with Syrian people, that the violent ideology of Daesh will not be able to emerge again. International community should focus on stabilization and reconstruction of areas that we are controlled by Daesh. There should be no more lost generation, no more children suffering, and no more people losing their homes. Slovenia stands firmly behind UN Secretary General Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura in his efforts to reach a political agreement and bring peaceful solution to the Syrian crisis. Let me also express our support for all initiatives aimed at stopping the violence. We also support the efforts regarding humanitarian access. Slovenia continues to stress the importance of protecting civilians in armed conflicts. It's very important that the Syrian people get all the assistance they need and deserve. Slovenia continues to support the work of international organizations in the region, as well as the implementation of projects focused on empowering women and children refugees. We will also focus on providing scholarships and bilateral projects implemented by Slovenia International Trust Fund Enhancing Human Security, ITF. We also look forward to supporting Syria's political transition and reconstruction. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Carl. I now give the floor for the last three interventions to France, the envoy Frank Gallet, then Italy and Algeria.
Representative, I shall speak on behalf of Deputy Minister Lemoine, who is currently sitting at the Security Council. Ladies and gentlemen, the scale of the humanitarian disaster in Syria requires unprecedented mobilization from the whole international community. The Union and its member states are the most important contributors from a humanitarian standpoint. We must continue our support, our commitment to this with all our partners. One issue in particular important for France is the question of humanitarian access. As you know, President Macron has made improving the humanitarian situation one of his priorities for this crisis. It is inconceivable that in 2017, military strategies based on sieges and the starvation of besieged populations can still be tolerated. As we speak, the siege policy continues. Humanitarian access remains limited, and the regime continues to exploit assistance from the international community. Those who support the regime are first and foremost responsible for continuing their pressure to ensure what constitutes, and I would like to underline this, an obligation under international humanitarian law. The entire international community must push in this direction. As far aid to refugees is concerned, some 5 million Syrians have found refuge outside Syria, mainly in neighboring countries, but also in Europe. I would like to express France's full solidarity with these refugees and the neighboring countries that are welcoming them. We hope that they will be able to voluntarily return to their country in dignity and complete safety. But only a credible political solution will create the right conditions for their return. France is fully mobilized to reach this objective and bring new momentum to the political process and negotiations carried out under the auspices of the United Nations. This is the very purpose of the contact group that has been proposed by President Macron. While waiting for Syrians to be able to return home, we must continue to support host countries. France notably wishes to participate fully in the international assistance given to Lebanon in the face of the refugee crisis. As the French president indicated during Prime Minister Hariri's visit, we hope to work to reinforce the Lebanese economy and infrastructure by organizing a conference of investors for Lebanon in 2018. The aim is to support dynamic economic activity in Lebanon, which will benefit all Lebanese citizens, the host communities, but also refugees, while waiting for conditions to allow their return to Syria. This project is fully in line with the efforts of the international community, supported by the organizers of the London and Brussels conferences. You touched on a third equally important issue, our help for stabilization in Syria. This must allow Syrians to live in dignity, but in the absence of a credible political solution, it must not feed the predation strategies that the regime is using in Syria. First and foremost, the strategy of population displacement and dispossession. This is a strong European position to which we are very attached and which is part of the strategy that the European Union set last April. We also believe it is essential that help to stabilize Syria leads to the eradication of the terrorist threat. As you know, we are currently overcoming Daesh from a military standpoint, but the battle is not over. To eradicate terrorism, we must now stabilize the areas that we have helped to liberate. France believes that this must be a key priority for the work by the European Union to stabilize Syria. France is ready to participate in efforts to rebuild Syria. But in the absence of a credible political solution, all efforts to rebuild would only serve the accomplices of the criminal regime that is responsible for this crisis. Our efforts would not benefit the population and would not help to stabilize the country. We must unequivocally remind all those who are unsure of the clear standpoint of the European Union, the Arab League, and the G7, we will not fund the reconstruction of Syria without a sustainable political solution. Any other position would only encourage the regime to destroy and massacre with the assurance that whatever happens, we would indeed end up paying out of weariness. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup. I now give the floor to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Italy, Enzo Amendola, and then to the Permanent Representative of Algeria.
High Representative Federica Mogherini, Minister, Excellencies, I would like to thank you very much for convening this meeting. The Syria tragedy continues and we support your commitment for an urgent action. We welcome the establishment of the de-escalation zone since they have reduced violence, but we are still very concerned by the horrific humanitarian crisis. Indeed, the parties and notably the regime have yet to allow a full and sustained humanitarian access to the entire Syrian territory. At the same time, we must not lose sight of the necessity to safeguard Syria's unity, integrity, and sovereignty, supporting the efforts of Staffan de Mistura towards a meaningful intra-Syrian dialogue. 7 years of tragedy, 5 million still refugees in the neighboring country, brought us today to a situation where the sustainability of the military de-escalation, welcoming the work in Astana in the Amman meeting are of course in the center of our attention. But we have to pass to the second step, so what de Mistura called the political de-escalation and the inclusive negotiation within Geneva track, where is needed also the European agenda. Indeed, only a genuine, inclusive and political transition can bring a nationwide, a long-lasting solution to this conflict and credible institution in Damascus. That means, in short term, 4 points that I present. First of all, we are reassured to see Daesh retreating, but the battle is far from over. We cannot allow Idlib to become a safe haven for any organization linked to Al-Qaeda. In Idlib, there are around 2 million civilians, including many internally displaced people. Second, never forget, perpetrators of major violation of human rights from all sides shall be accountable. Therefore, we welcome the recent establishment of the UN accountability mechanism. 3, we welcome the discussion today on common criteria for long-term stabilization activity. We support the so-called Brussels process under your leadership, High Commissioner, because this is the mark where everybody on the multilateral level and also on the national level can stress and strengthen the promotion of many initiatives to foster the resilience of the communities in Syria. And in line with this, Italy confirms also the 3 years pledge at 2016 London conference of $400 million. We know that we all need to do more, if it's possible also in the de-escalation areas, provided that there are guarantees that the regime will respect the de-escalation agreements. Fourth, ultimately, we will not finance reconstruction without a genuine political transition in Damascus, because only a serious transition in line with Security Council Resolution 2254 can invert the trend in Syria, paving the way for the safe return of refugees, for reunification, for stabilization, and for reconciliation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. And so I now give the floor to the Permanent Representative of Algeria, followed by Canada. And then we close.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you for our initiative to hold this meeting that is taking place while major developments took place these last weeks, and which consequences are being felt in the military theater inside Syria, as well as in the diplomatic and political fronts. From the very start of this crisis, we all along the duration of this horrible conflict that is ripping apart this brotherly country, Algeria has followed and advocated a constant policy based for its most on the need of a political solution, which will be an inclusive one. And we are more than ever convinced that it is through dialogue and reconciliation that all Syrians would solve all their disputes, the disputes that oppose them, so to preserve their unity, the territorial integrity, and the sovereignty of their country. Algeria is satisfied with the progress noted within the Geneva process, for which we reiterate our full support. And we have welcomed also with satisfaction the result of the Astana 15 September meeting on the modalities for de-escalation in the fourth area in Idlib province, as well for the functioning of the fourth zones. Algeria is also satisfied with this significant downgraded impact of terrorist groups everywhere in Syria, and in particular of the Daesh group, which is facing major setbacks in Syria and in neighboring Iraq. It is, although premature, to conclude that terrorism will be very soon defeated, because terrorism still has resources and can adapt itself very quickly. It is thus important to continue to combat it without respite and to pursue with resolve efforts to cut off its sources of financing and to combat violent extremism. It is equally important to pay full attention to the thousands of foreign fighters, which, as soon as the crisis in Syria will end or be contained, will go back to their countries of origin or join other areas of conflict and beyond, and sow death and distress. Obviously, nothing can diverge us from the unfathomable plight of the millions of refugees and displaced, and who depend today on the generosity and humanitarian assistance of the international community. We have to be also in full solidarity with the neighboring states that have sheltered on their territories the refugees and who are consenting tremendous sacrifices for their well-being and safety. Let me add that Algeria, which is rather geographically far from Syria, is sheltering tens of thousands of refugees also. Only the end of the Syrian conflict would put an end to the plight and trials of these millions of refugees and displaced. And our efforts should continue to aim at the quick settlement of this crisis, so to allow these refugees to go back and live in peace and security in their territories. As far as Algeria is concerned, our foreign policy principles, we will continue to support with strong resolve a political solution as the only way to solve the conflict in Syria, a solution based on Security Council Resolution 2254 adopted after the Second Geneva Conference, as the only basis that will allow the Syrian people to rebuild and reconstruct their state and to preserve their unity, sovereignty on all their territory, with the understanding that the choice of leaders or governments is the exclusive right of sovereign people, as it is the case in any democracy that respects the rule of law. And thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Last but not least at all, I give the floor to the Syria coordinator of Canada.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for convening us and allowing us to take stock of this human tragedy, but also this man-made tragedy. Thank you also for bringing us together to follow up on the Brussels conference, which served to generate hope for Syrians and for the region, and to provide some relief. I'm pleased to report on behalf of my minister that Canada is well underway in delivering on what was in Brussels the fourth largest commitment and pledge. This said, this is insufficient. It's a Band-Aid. We're treating the symptoms of our collective inability to resolve the crisis. And the real solution will come through an end to the violence, a success in the fight against Daesh, in bringing accountability for the crimes committed in Syria, and we just had a good discussion on the IIIM, and through a lasting political solution. That solution will come through the commendable efforts of the UN and of the Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura and his team, and through our collective mobilization around the values and the principles of this institution. Canada is engaged, we're engaged on all fronts, and I thank you very much. Merci, shukran.
Merci beaucoup, shukran. Let me wrap up. First of all, apologizing for the delay. I guess you cannot expect an Italian chairing a meeting on Syria to be on time, but especially I would like to apologize with the many ministers, one of which just joined us now, for the delay in the running of our working that has probably had an impact on their ability to deliver their speeches, but we have either listened to their contributions through their representatives or others that might not be, haven't been able to deliver their contributions. We have a dedicated webpage for this event that will stay, so we will welcome written contributions that can enrich our works. Summing up, I've heard common messages coming here from very diverse actors that have very different political positions, including on the crisis in Syria, that I think can help the work in the months ahead. There are differences, but there is also some common ground that can constitute a good basis for the further work. First, the common commitment to deliver the pledges. Second, to sustain the humanitarian aid in time, giving continuity and predictability. Third, support recovery in de-escalation zones and liberated areas, working for the stabilization and making sure that Syrian people stay at the center of our work. Fourth, prepare for the reconstruction. I know that, and I apologize especially with Kristalina Georgieva, I know that the World Bank is also very keen in giving a contribution in this respect. Prepare for the reconstruction that will start when a political agreement will be reached in Geneva. Other points, actively support and encourage the parties, the Syrian parties, to engage in Geneva into serious negotiations. I've heard, Staffan, allow me to be your advocate for one moment. We've heard from all of you words of appreciation and commending the work of Staffan and his team in Geneva. Let me tell you that we believe that beyond commending its work, we need to actively help his work. Each of us has some ears to which we can talk, and the messages that each of us can convey to the different Syrian parties will help actively the work of the United Nations and of Staffan in Geneva. If we are serious about achieving a political solution, a political agreement under UN auspices, we can contribute to that goal, and I think this is the right moment to do so. Last but not least, we have different processes going on. For us, it's clear the political track in Geneva under the UN auspices, under the leadership of Staffan de Mistura, is the key element if we want to solve the war and the crisis, linking the process in Geneva, the political process in Geneva, with the talks on reducing violence that are bringing fruits in Astana, and the work on humanitarian aid, recovery and stabilization that we're doing under the Brussels process can help us streamlining efforts of the international community and bringing good results. Last but not least, I think that we can invite you all next spring in Brussels for continuing this work, hoping that we will be able to register some progress in all this field, the military one, the political one, and the recovery and stabilization and humanitarian one. I thank you very much for your contributions, and let's hope for the best for our work.